the 11 Warriors Emergency Service in Columbus, Ohio has determined that there is an elevated risk from Michigan fans at this time. Expect Wolverines in your vicinity to become more agitated than normal, as they become drunk with power over wins against directional schools founded in 1979 as part of a bet between two drunk billionaires. Approach with caution, as Michigan fans in the state may bite upon hearing the phrase "the spot was good."
It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. It's game week. Let's go. We're finally here. We've emerged. We've emerged from the dark recesses of the offseason to this. The game week, Ohio State
Akron
is going to play Akron, the hated Akron Zips.
That's what's gotten us out of our long slumber, our summer hibernation. Is the frickin' Zips.
Yeah, I'm like crawling out of Plato's cave, and I'm just like, oh my god! And then it's the Zips, and it's the greatest game that's ever been played. I'm really excited about it. We'll talk about that later on in the podcast, but.
That's not all we're frothing with anticipation.
That's right. That's where the breaking news goes. That sound means that it's time for a Michigan scandal update. So we're really we'll talk about all kinds of stuff this episode. We've got all the changes coming to college football that we're going to discuss a little bit. Some week 0 action blended into that, which was fun. And of course, Akron, but we do have to talk about how news broke this weekend. We're recording this on Monday. So I think yesterday it happened on Sunday, right? Pretty sure it was Sunday.
Yeah,
the days are blending together.
As I clarified on last week's episode, I was weekend editor at 11 Warriors this past weekend, and as I was getting ready to publish the Weekender, with my lead story being about the Stalions Sign Stealer Netflix documentary that drops in roughly 2 hours as we're recording this on Monday night, 10 minutes before I'm supposed to publish that, the news breaks that the NOA has arrived at Michigan.
Yes.
And it's pretty much the same thing as what leaked to ESPN at the beginning of August.
You mean Michigan wasn't working off a more current draft? That there wasn't some second...
That's
outside...
what the editor of the Wolverine told me. They said that 3 different sources in the program said that, that's an old draft. That's a really old draft. Sources. Really old draft, and that Michigan is working from a different version.
Yes.
And that most of the most scandalous stuff has been stripped out, and the Michigan is relatively unbothered by what's happening, and this is just a big nothing breakfast burger like everything else that's happened in Michigan the last couple of years. Give me a break, these BS peddlers.
Why would you lie about
continued
something?
Propaganda.
Yeah,
it's insane.
Why would you lie about something so easily verifiably false? Like, I don't understand. With
no level of skepticism, just being willing to believe that, they're not worried, so I'm not worried, and I'm going to let all our fans know about it.
I mean, at this point, and I have seen this, I've gone on like Michigan message boards and whatnot, and I do think that there is now, after they're reporting on like the Harbaugh contract situation, all this other stuff, I think there's much more skepticism of these insiders than there used to be, which is good. I mean, finally, I'm glad that's kind of taking hold.
Well, yeah, that's what tends to happen when you tell people that it's not really a big deal, and then they get egg all over their face.
Right. And so, if you look at the actual reporting on all of this, okay, so if the NOA, the notice of allegations is, basically the same as the draft that they received a few weeks ago that ESPN reported on, other outlets reported on. Even
though the details aren't public yet, this is what national college reporters have clarified in wake of this. The news arriving that the NOA is at Michigan.
Yeah,
now.
It's fundamentally the same document. I think they've said maybe minor changes, but essentially the same thing. That includes level 1 violations, the most severe for Michigan. Sharon Moore Other staffers are facing like level 1 and level 2 violations, or at least, accusations of doing all this stuff. And the thing about it that I find really interesting, so, I think what a lot of Ohio State fans were thinking about, a lot of other college football fans were thinking, is that, okay, this would be the document that proves this connection between what Connor Stalions was doing and the rest of the Michigan staff. In other words, it's going to connect that dot, those two dots, and say, all right, the staff definitely knew about that. At least if they're, going off of that draft, that's not what the notice of allegations will likely do. However, it will also probably show, okay, that Michigan, and this is the quote from the original, this is the quote from the original story on the draft. But the big problem here is not necessarily that, this was a pervasive thing that every single person in the Michigan football program knew about, but it was a pattern of non-compliance within the football program. That's level 1 violation charge. And the fact that they were, I think the word, it was like to thwart the investigation. And I guess that includes like Sherrone Moore. Yeah. I think that includes Sherrone Moore trying to get rid of his text messages that he then said he later provided, and then said, "Oh no, I hope everybody reads them." Which I look
forward to those messages that I deleted and tried to hide from the NCAA investigators becoming public knowledge.
And I, going through all of this, I keep going back to that quote from another story where one of the witnesses or the people cooperating with the NCAA investigation was saying that, look, it was Michigan football policy to go right up to the line of noncompliance and then just step right over it. And that to me is like, again, if you're looking for this like grand conspiratorial thing where like they're connecting the dots and Connor Stalions is like inside Jim Harbaugh's office.
That was their former recruiting analyst, by the way, talking about the Harbaugh breakfast burger scandal.
Right. So my point is that if you're looking for a video of Sherrone Moore handing an envelope full of cash to Connor Stalions and then him handing like a zip drive.
No, that was Jay Harbaugh's job, and he did that through Venmo.
That's right. Yeah, and they were buying T-shirts from each other and things like that. But my point is that I don't know that those dots are going to be connected by the notice of allegations. We'll find out. I don't know. Eventually, that's going to come out. The timeline for this is like 130 days, something like that. I think ultimately the timeline suggests that this won't get done until like Christmas. But my larger point with all of this is
it'll be later than that. I think it'll probably not even until next year.
It might not be, right? And so my larger point with all of this is that it's not necessarily about being able to finally connect those dots, but the fact that Michigan has repeatedly tried to hinder the NCAA investigation, delete messages, basically do everything that they could not to cooperate, which is understandable if you've done something really, really stupid. And I kind of think that there are a lot of people at Michigan who kind of realized that that's what was going on with Connor Stalions, that there was something incredibly dumb going on here, and Michigan was benefiting from it, and they really wanted to keep it under wraps at all costs. So I don't know. I don't know what the ultimate, outcome of all of this is. I think anybody who tells you that they do is wrong. But I do think that this is going to be more serious than I had originally anticipated. I think the NCAA is angry about being stonewalled. I think they're serious about this being a violation of the values that they're trying to uphold as an institution. I would say that they're doing it very poorly. They're not doing a good job at upholding those values. And that's, this is kind of a fly-by-night operation there, but they're angry about it. And I think that does mean that there could be significant penalties for both Michigan and Sherrone Moore. So I don't know. This is a bigger deal than I really had initially anticipated. I thought maybe the draft would be backed off a little bit, and that does not seem to be the case.
No, and just to try to kind of respond individually to the different things that you just said there.
Yeah.
There isn't actually any, the name of the document itself is a notice of allegations.
Right.
So that's not going to be a full report detailing all of the evidence that the NCAA had. The NCAA is not going to show their entire hand to Michigan in terms of notifying them what they're accusing them of.
Right. Particularly if Michigan's going to take him to court and, try to litigate this elsewhere.
Right. They need to say they need to not show their whole hand in order to see this process through, so that Michigan, particularly if they're suspicious of the fact that Michigan hasn't been forthcoming and tried to cover up their tracks, they don't want to show their whole hand to give them an opportunity to refute the evidence that is potentially in possession by the NCAA. So I was never expecting anything wholly damning to come out of that draft or any new version of the draft, regardless of whether it was a really old draft that Michigan had or the same draft that has now actually arrived in Ann Arbor. So that's one thing. But there were several points in there that I still thought were interesting, because there were, if you'll recall, there were a couple things that were in the leak at the beginning of August that we weren't necessarily privy to before, in addition to a whole bunch of different recruiting violations that weren't even related to the Burgergate Harbaugh scandal. We weren't aware of the fact that Stalions outright removed hard drives from the university's computer system.
Right.
Which
and
is highly suspicious behavior.
Real quick, I forgot to add this, though. This is the thing that because Connor Stalions' attorneys did respond to this, right? And so they were basically saying,
hasn't Connor suffered enough, Johnny?
Not
Why
only
are
that,
we still talking about this?
Not only that, but they were doing like the Air Bud defense. There's like, well, there's no law that says you can't put, stolen footage from other opponents on your own personal computer and then take it with you and distribute. Like they're
or have your friends and family go to the games, record everything, and then send it to you.
Right. Which, and the funniest part about this is that
you would think that Michigan booster money would afford Connor an attorney that knows what agency is, right?
Well, and like
a Michigan man, if you will.
Yeah. And it's funny because this is from Brad Crawford over at 24/7 Sports. And Brad Crawford kind of, details all of this. And then at the end, I just love the way he wrote this, because at the end he has this paragraph where he's like, this is the actual NCAA rule that he obviously violated. And then his lawyer is saying, oh yeah, we did that. And it's just, it blows my mind, because it's like, you really don't see a problem with any of this. Like, it's not, you don't think it's a big deal. You don't think it's a big deal. It must be the
same lawyer that incorporated his and Quorum's vacuum repair salesman business.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I don't see a problem with this. This is totally fine. So
anyway,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm glad. It's great that you interjected with that, because the funniest thing to come out of yesterday was that statement made by his lawyer where he literally said, hasn't Connor suffered enough?
Yeah. Right.
Like, give me a break. Yeah, he's really suffering while Michigan gets to gloat about that national championship, and he's a folk hero, and
which was
Michigan,
his goal all along,
and showing his face at bars for the game a month after he got dismissed from the team.
Right.
What and got paid to be in a Netflix special that's going to release in 2 hours as we're recording this. What a
tough life.
What a tragic life Stalions has lived of late.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm glad you interjected with that. But getting back to the NOA draft before it became the official notice, in addition to Stalions taking the hard drives out of the university computer system, the other thing that we weren't previously aware of that the draft alleges that he did is that he took the play calling sheet, the opponent play calling sheet, and delivered it to a member of the football team to then give to an intern that Stalions would then be able to recover later on. Presumably he did this after the news broke of this entire operation. Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, was Michigan still operating on this information that Stalions illicitly obtained even after the news became public that they were being implicated in this sign stealing scandal?
Right.
Now, that's going to be very interesting to see if they continued to try to cheat on top of covering their tracks after the NCAA and the public became aware that this was happening. Now, you blend that in with the fact that the lead, what ESPN chose to make the lead portion of what the NCAA said they had in the NOA draft was the 52 text message thread that included correspondence between Sharon Moore and Stalions that Moore deleted, that the NCAA during recovery was able to extract. So it's good. I saw one other, like, Michigan, like, I don't know if it was actually, I don't think it was an insider. I think it was one of these like charlatan Twitter accounts, like information repurposing people or whatever. But they said something to the effect of it's important that they didn't actually have to use the extraction software. They were like in Sharon Moore's trash bin.
Right.
So even though they were deleted, they were still technically on his phone. So
Ice-T on SVU didn't have to like do a forensic analysis, or like CSI didn't have to like that's not a good look in your favor. The
hoops these people have jumped through to try to whitewash themselves of any wrongdoing. It's just absolutely unbelievable. But so that's the stuff relative to the draft that is going to be interesting. That was interesting when the leak happened. That if it is still in the draft, it will be interesting to see what further evidence the NCAA has uncovered relative to this, the notice of allegations now being delivered to Michigan. I mean, and there was very scathing language in that notice too. The quote that I keep coming back to, that they used themselves, that they explicitly attributed to, and again, the funniest thing that the NOA confirmed that is, I mean, there's no way that this isn't still part of the one that just got sent to Michigan, is that Stalions was on the sideline for Central Michigan for Michigan State's season opener. And there's since been another video that's been released of, it's one thing that Stalions was actually like, using the Google glasses to record the sideline signals for Michigan State. But there's actually video of him advising the Central Michigan staff on what they need to do against Michigan State. So that is a whole different thing now in terms of going to an unrelated opponent and trying to sabotage the efforts of another team, where in a game that Michigan isn't even involved in. But the language that they use relative to that specific incident, but one that still applies to Stalions' entire behavior in this in general, is his conduct, quote, seriously undermined or threatened the integrity of the NCAA collegiate model. And when you factor that in to the consideration that Michigan is now eligible for being repeat offenders based on what happened with the Breakfast Burger Gate scandal under Harbaugh, and the other interesting component here that we haven't brought up yet, that wasn't aware to anybody, wasn't in the original NOA draft report and became knowledge yesterday, was that Jesse Minter, who's one of the people that flew the coop for the NFL, and Denard Robinson, who was still on staff earlier this offseason before being dismissed for a DUI, the second Michigan staff member to be dismissed for such behavior this offseason, by the way.
Yeah.
They're both working with the NCAA on negotiating resolutions.
Right.
So it's very, very interesting that all of that tied together, it makes you wonder how much evidence do they really have here? What are Jesse Minter and Denard Robinson saying? Why are they negotiating these plea deals in order to prevent
I don't know if you call them a
themselves?
plea deal, but
I am using that language until we get more details.
Sure, yeah.
No, I'm
with
it's
you,
going
man.
to be interesting to see what other information comes out.
Exactly.
I don't expect the NCAA to show their whole hand, but this is a lot. To your point, this is much more serious now than we were being cautiously optimistic and trying to say, we can't, even if we want, not necessarily forfeitures, but vacated wins. We perhaps shouldn't get our hopes super up for that. Certainly not for a national championship being off the table, particularly given that's more enforced by the College Football Playoff Committee rather than the NCAA itself.
Right.
But all of this now being, further, the fact that NOA has since been vindicated relative to most of it being relatively unchanged based on what's been reported and all the other information I just laid out, it's
Well,
very, very interesting what kind of implication that's going to have for Michigan after this season.
And there's the rub though, right? Like we got to know exactly what was changed and how much of it's intact, what they might have added, what they might have taken out. I think that's probably the biggest part here, is to see exactly what that is. And I'm sure that'll come out. I mean, I can't imagine that's going to stay under wraps, until January, late December, whatever. I got to believe that that's something that's going to become apparent here relatively soon.
Well, Michigan has 90 days to respond, and
right.
it'll be
and they'll have to respond to specific allegations too.
It'll
so
be
I would
interesting
imagine
to see how quickly they do that too, because the game is in 96 days as we're recording this today. So they're going to have to give a response no later than a week before they play Ohio State.
Let me ask you this:
put it off that long.
Do you think
I would love to see that happen during game week?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they do that. But what's interesting to me and what I was thinking about was like, okay, let's say Michigan, they could have a year. I think their offense is going to be really bad this year. But they're going to have a great defense. They're going to have an excellent defense.
They wouldn't commit to naming a quarterback today.
No, I know. Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's not a good sign. It's either,
as we know from last season.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But anyway, my point is that let's say Michigan goes out there and they completely bomb it, right? Like this is a throwaway season. They say the hell with it. They lose, 8 or 9 games, whatever. I don't necessarily expect that to happen, but I think if it does happen, their stance toward all of this changes. I think it changes their approach. I think it changes how they want to address it publicly, all that kind of stuff. But if they have like an Iowa kind of season where maybe their offense is booty, but their defense is so good that like they're still in the playoff conversation, they're still in the Big Ten conversation. I mean, as much as we joked about Iowa last year, they were in the Big Ten championship game, right? And Ohio State wasn't. So like, if they have that kind of season where they're still in it to win it and they still believe they got a chance to make some noise, I don't know what Michigan's play is, because as you said, do they want to save that for the week of the game? Do they want to wait that long to try to address something that big, or do they want to try to get it out of the way?
Their whole stance towards this from the beginning has been deny.
Right.
I don't think that the circumstances of the season are going to change that for anything.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, the mental gymnastics that their fans and the media continue to do in order to not only vindicate themselves of any wrongdoing, but paint Stalions as a lone wolf, which I think is further reflected in the forthcoming documentary, and is one of the main reasons why we were saying weeks ago it's going to be interesting to see how quickly the NCAA moves on this, given the timing of the documentary. And then we get this notice the Sunday less than 72 hours before the documentary is supposed to release.
Yeah.
That
Which
is not
I'm not surprised at all
timing.
that they decided to go
wanted to make sure that Michigan was not going to be able to control the narrative on this on the eve of the start of the season.
Right.
And it kind of stinks, because we would be having a very different conversation if we actually had the documentary out right now.
I know.
Respond to it.
I know.
But we're going to be able to do all of that next week. So,
yeah.
audience members, as you're listening to this on Tuesday and you may have already watched the documentary, we apologize for not having that information available.
See,
but next week's Dubcast, believe me, we're going to talk about
I look forward to talking about both the documentary and Fresno State's victory over Michigan next Monday. That'll be a lot of fun for us. And
I don't want to say that's wishful thinking, but as I say with many things in this scandal, I would like to see it.
There you go. I would like to see it. So that all kinds of fun stuff. We talked about it here for a few minutes. Look, again, anybody who's telling you they know exactly what's going to happen is just lying and talking out of their butt. Just here's my advice.
Except for us and Buckeye Scoop, according to the Detroit media, who praised both outlets for their reporting on this story. But you could decide, Buckeye fans, who is the more credible of those two options.
That's right.
The one with a credential, or the one that steals all of their
which is also hilarious
from the forums of the other outlet.
I feel like nobody told the Detroit media like what they got in trouble for at one point. It's like, hang on a second, guys. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Anybody who
the
tells
ice cream
you,
guys don't have a media credential. They should have clarified that to the Detroit.
So we'll see how this all
people.
plays out. But we're just, hey man, we're just out here reacting to it week by week, just like you guys. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I know the future, unlike some people, because we don't. Yeah, it's going to be wild. That's all I know. So, and like I said, it does seem to be a lot more serious than I had originally thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to kind of fade away. Kind of happy it's not. So we're going to see how that plays out, and of course, we'll watch the Connor Stalions documentary to see if there's any personal mentions of myself. I mean, that's really the only reason why I care. Real quick, so we got
supposedly there's an 11 Warriors forum poster in this documentary.
We'll see. Okay, real quick, before we do Ask Us Anything, there were a ton of changes to college football this year. And before we start the season proper, I know we've had a couple games or whatever, but before we start the season proper, I do want to ask you, George, about kind of your takes on some of these, because there have been some big changes, some really, really significant changes to the landscape of college football. And I kind of want to digest that just briefly before we kind of get into, Akron and all this other stuff we want to talk about. By the way, speaking of that game,
I hear they mix the postseason up a bit. Is that true?
That is true. And I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about, this is kind of my segue into it, which is the Florida State Georgia Tech game that was in Ireland. I know you had in the background, you were checking it out.
Banger way to start the season.
It was fantastic. Anytime that Florida State gets stuff into a locker, I'm personally, happy about that. I think it's great that I really think it's great that after all the whining and complaining that they did about being left out of the college football playoff, that they have gone out and looked like trash in the successive games since then. Just absolute garbage. And again, it was a close game, but also Florida State was supposed to have this great defense, this amazing defensive line, and Georgia Tech pretty much bullied them all night. So that was pretty fun to watch.
Well, I will say that bowl game they had last year, I mean, I think as
they didn't want to be
fans, we can sympathize with the fact that they had a ton of compromising opt-outs.
Okay, but also, if any team had an incentive to look really awesome and to play really hard, it would have been the Florida State Seminoles, and they did not go out and do that. Regardless,
because most of the players that wanted to be in the college football playoff had already said, you know what?
Yeah, or
we're out. If we're not playing for glory, we're out. And you know what? That's what a lot of Ohio State players said last year too.
That's
so
true.
I'm just saying, I get sympathize with them for that performance. Going to Ireland and then, blaming your shortcomings on jet lag or what have you. I mean, that's come on, man.
DJ Uiagalelei at this point, I mean, he is who he is. He's on his third team, I think. And
it was great that everybody was like, oh, Kirk Herbstreit's probably so happy Florida State lost. And in the back, I'm thinking, yeah, but he had DJ in his top 3 transfer portal quarterbacks for the last season, and not Will Howard.
Right.
So, how much credit are we really giving him for this?
I'm not going to give him a ton, but the reason why I bring up the game, even though it was a great game that ended, dramatically in exciting fashion, with Georgia Tech going and love that the Irish, punter is the holder for the game-winning field goal. All that stuff's awesome. You got your
Ohio State's long snapper that screwed up in the game 2 years ago pulled off the swinging gate two-point conversion for Florida State. Shout out Mason Arnold doing big things on the 0-1 Seminoles squad.
Yeah, that's right. But here's my overall point. When you watch that game, you got your first glimpse into the new reality of college football for 2024, right? That was your first taste of it. So you got the 2-minute warning, you got the extended commercial, which there were unending commercials in that game.
That was rough.
Right. You got the whole, all the vibes are different. The fact that Florida State has lost this game and it means nothing, right? They can come back, they can win all the rest of their games. They can still lose a couple games and potentially make the college football playoff, depending on how the chips fall. This is the new reality of college football. And as much knowing all of that, knowing about the expanded playoff and, the way conferences are now and all this other stuff did not diminish in any way my enjoyment of the game. Added commercials did. The 2-minute warning, which serves no purpose whatsoever other than to add more commercials, that did. But the actual product on the field to me was still pretty kick-ass. So I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. I like the expanded playoff. I think it's great that they're moving it to 12 teams.
Well, the interesting thing is, I mean, you and your, very, focused and unbiased position can look at what happened and say, oh, it may not even end up mattering in the grand scheme for the Florida State football team if they can bounce back and recover their ranking a little bit and still end up sliding in as one of those, back half teams in the college football playoff. It's a very measured take from you because you don't really have an emotional stake in what just happened.
Right.
The Seminoles fan base has completely melted down on itself. Which
is also great.
To your point about the changes that have taken place in college football, part of the reason that that's happened is because the effects of these changes have not actually materialized yet. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, is this the last season where we see fan bases freaking out about these losses and then when their teams actually end up bouncing back and making the playoff going forward after this season? Are we going to see as many emotional reactions from fan bases in wake of these shortcomings as we have in previous years? This is something we've been very cautiously speaking on relative to Ohio State's game against Oregon, that the emotional reaction in the event the Buckeyes lose that game could be potentially very sharp, and a lot of mean things might be getting thrown around about Will Howard or the offensive line or various other position groups, or Ryan Day especially, in terms of his ability to quote unquote win the big games against top 5 opponents. So we're still a month away from that actually happening. But again, if Ohio State ends up losing that game and still making the playoff, if that same scenario happens a year from now, and we've seen, or a similar scenario happens a year from now, and we've seen how these early to mid-season losses aren't really necessarily damning in terms of the overall prospects of a team making the postseason, are the effects of these losses going to cause such sharp reactions from the fan bases at the top levels of college football as they have previously? If you're somebody that savors the delicious anguish of these teams that can't grapple with loss, this might be your swan song.
Yeah.
This might be the last season where you can really relish in the emotional anguish that comes with seeing postseason aspirations blown up, because even though it feels really bad for a lot of these, specifically for Florida State, but they're not going to be the only team that presumably fumbles their chances away, or at least appears to, in the coming weeks of the first half of the season. Is this your last chance to observe and take joy in that? And will fan bases after this season, once we see the effects of the 12-team playoff, really have as much of a sharp reaction to such circumstances?
I think
that's what I'm most interested in relative to the changes that are about to go into effect.
I think it depends on the fan base. Like, Ohio State fans are going to freak out no matter what. I don't know that there's going to be any kind of tempered reaction to a loss, from Ohio State fan. I don't know that anybody's going to be like, we'll get them next time, or, see you in the Big Ten championship. I don't see that happening. But I do think that overall, especially if you see a team akin to the NFL playoffs, lose a couple early and then get in and then get on a run and win a national championship, a lot of people are going to be pointing that and going, see, it's, anybody can get in, anybody can win it. And I'm fine with that. That's okay. I know a lot of people, I've seen some people who don't like the expanded college football playoff specifically for that reason, right? It invalidates the regular season. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I do think the regular season needs to be shortened, but I still think those narratives, those emotions, how people feel about wins and losses, I don't know that's going to go away significantly, for the more passionate fan bases. But, that's I will enjoy it while I can.
I think for Florida a team like Ohio State, where it really has felt like you got to run the table or you're not going to get in for a lot of these college football playoff campaigns, I'm very appreciative of the new format because
Sure.
I know Ohio State is at a high enough level, and this has been reflected in a lot of the playoff rankings since it started, where these 1-2 loss Ohio State teams will finish very consistently in that 5 to 6 range.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of circumstances where they deserve to be in and didn't get in.
See, back in my day, in the mid 2000s, you had to rely on West Virginia like screwing things up in the last weekend of the season if you wanted Ohio State to back their way into a national championship. Now you've got this playoff and they can just get in.
Well, it lessens the blow that, I mean, in a circumstance like ours where every year feels like national championship or bust,
right?
A loss isn't a bust anymore.
No,
it's
and that's setback, a good but it's perspective
not a bust.
Though.
And that for me as a fan is not something that I've been familiar with in pretty much my entire lifetime as an Ohio State fan. And I'm very grateful for that, which is why if they do end up losing to Oregon, I don't have to freak out and melt down about it the way that I'm sure a lot of other people will.
Yeah.
Because I know in the back of my head, this team is probably still going to be in that 5 to 6 range at the end of the year, as they almost always are. And they'll have a chance to compete for a national title.
100%.
So
100%.
It's great. It's a great position for us to be in, I think, as Buckeye fans.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. All right, so there's a little bit of perspective on the incoming 2024 football season. Let's go ahead and do Ask Us Anything. But before we do that, I want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, check it out. All good stuff. drygoods.11warriors.com. Let's start with a question from Kevin. Hey, guys. Who on the various watch lists do you think will earn an award? Can I tell you something, Kevin? I gotta be completely honest with you, dude. I don't pay attention to the watch lists at the beginning of the season. I am so anti watch list. I know there's we have a whole week basically where it's like, all right, watch list A, watch list B. We know exactly what days are going to be coming out. We get them in our emails, and I think it's the most useless exercise possible. I'm serious, man. And I appreciate the question. I'm sorry. I please do not make this a reflection on you asking the question. I totally appreciate and understand it, but I don't even think we should have polls until October. You know what I mean? That's the kind of guy that I am.
Oh yeah. I don't put any stock into polls during the first month of the season, really.
The preseason watch list is how you get Denard Robinson as a Heisman favorite, in the third week of September. That
you saw a top 10 team lose in the first game of the season.
Yeah. And here's part of the reason why I really hate those. This is the real reason. It's I know people make fun of them, make jokes about it and stuff, but what really, really bothers me is that it suffocates narratives. So if there's a guy from a team that's not traditionally, a powerhouse, or maybe he's not somebody that got a lot of publicity earlier on in his career, but then let's say there's this linebacker from Tulsa who has 200 tackles in a season, or 18 and a half sacks or something like that. Because he didn't originally appear on these lists, and because that narrative wasn't formed prior to the year starting, he doesn't get the kind of publicity that a lot of these other guys do. And it really does bother me, honestly, as a fan, when I'm going through the stats, or I'm looking at highlights and things like that, and there's somebody who just pops off the screen, and I'm like, why the hell haven't I heard about this dude? And it's because, we focused all this attention on these other guys that we expected to be amazing. And I'm like, that to me does a disservice to the rest of college football, and that is part of why that kind of bothered me. So I don't know. Heisman Trophy for Will Howard. How about that? That's that's what I'm calling.
I think what we've seen from the Buckeye offense, under Ryan Day's system, is that you're never really going to see any individual compete, or not compete. but be in a leading position to obtain one of those end of
They're
season
too multiple.
awards just relative to production.
Yeah,
There's
like,
too many mouths to feed,
right.
and Ryan Day's too willing to distribute the touches to make sure that not only everybody eats, but that the defense is kept honest relative to where the focal point of attack could be coming from at any given time.
Marvin Harrison won the Blitnikoff last year, not because of these overwhelming stats he was putting up, but because talent-wise, he was just undeniably the best.
He should have won it 2 years in a row, and he didn't because they had other mouths to feed in the offense at the receiver position.
Exactly. And that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. Now, I don't think he's on any watch list, but I'm going to go with a dark horse here in terms of who I think could end up winning an end of season award. Nick McLarty just got named the starting punter for
Hell
this team.
Yeah, dude. Who's to deny a 6'7" Aussie?
Who else is kicking the ball 90 yards out of the stadium?
There we go.
That's mean, it remains to be seen what that guy's coffin corner ability is going to be, but I mean, look, if this offense really isn't clicking on all cylinders and getting in the end zone or the red zone every time, and there's ample opportunities where they're going to need to win the field position battle, maybe Ryan Day's a little bit more conservative going on fourth down this year, just knowing that they've got the defense that they do where they are able to like reliably get a stop and get the ball back. I mean, if they get stopped in their own half and they got a punt, I mean, Nick McLarty is putting the other team back in their 20 or worse every time.
And
I think if that's consistently happening, regardless of where Ohio State's offensive drives sputter out, that guy's going to be a great candidate for the Groza. It's one of those names I've only seen.
Oh yeah, maybe it is Lou Groza. What's the Ray Guy one? Am I mixing them
maybe it is the Ray. No, the Groza is the kicker.
Yeah, Ray Guy
is the punter.
That's right. Yeah. I'm not going to screw that one up. Come on. You got to get the Ray Guy.
Anyway, that's my dark horse pick for an end of season award because I don't expect anybody on the offense to actually stand out for those. And we haven't seen, other than Caleb Downs in a different uniform, there haven't really been any substantial standout producers relative to defensive stats on Ohio State's team either on a consistent game-to-game basis. So
I think on defense, it would be like a guy like Burke or Downs to be, a leader in the clubhouse for that kind of thing for Ohio State.
I'm going Nick McLarty.
I like it. This one's from our good friend Alvin, who says, what other Big Ten teams are you rooting for to make the playoffs? None of them. I hope it's just Ohio State and nobody else.
This is the SEC.
Yeah, give me a break. I don't want any. No, and that's not even like.
We don't do that incestuous nonsense north of the Mason-Dixon line. Come on, Alvin.
I don't want a single, and that's not even a joke. Like I genuinely hope all the other teams screw it up and don't make the playoff, and I hope it's just Ohio State. Like I don't want to see any of the other Big Ten teams have success. I don't know. None of them. Absolutely none of them.
Not even the new ones like Oregon or Washington or USC.
No, you're in the Big Ten now, so now I hate you, and that's how it works out. This is not copacetic. Like you said, this isn't the SEC, right? We're not all like hugging and wearing Birkenstocks or other crap like in cocktail dresses. Like this is the Big Ten. We're sitting in the mud and we're throwing at each other, and I don't want any other Big Ten team to have any kind of measurable success. So none of them is my answer. And I assume that's your answer as well, but I don't.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not
Northwestern. You got to.
I'm not. No, come on. I'm not. I'm not openly hating on the rest of the conference the way that you are, but am I actively hoping anybody else does as well as Ohio State? No, I don't want to see that. Now, is it bad if any of those teams do well? I don't necessarily think so, but I don't want any realistic, tangible threats to Ohio State's national championship aspirations. So, no, I am not actively rooting, but I will just sit back and watch and see what teams emerge. We've seen Oregon in the same conversations as Ohio State. There were 2 members of the college game day desk this past weekend that picked Oregon to win the national title. And obviously Desmond Howard picked them to win the Big Ten championship over Ohio State.
So that's the touch of death.
There's a lot of enthusiasm around Oregon. And as we've spoken about before, regardless of what happens on October 12th, there's many speculating that Oregon and Ohio State are fated to play multiple times this year, twice, if not perhaps even a third time in the college football playoffs. So that could be a frequent touch point for them. I'm not necessarily rooting for Washington to do well. I do have family that are attached to USC, so I think just purely for argumentative purposes within my own hive, that would be amusing to see them do well and see how that would potentially affect Ohio State's quest. But no, otherwise, in terms of like the old guard, I mean, I never want to see Penn State do well just because I don't like James Franklin.
Well, yeah.
I don't want to see any of the Big Ten West do well, and it's more amusing for me to see them function as a bucket of crabs where they're consistently dragging each other back down into the depths of the scum of the Big Ten.
What about Fickle though? Like what about Wisconsin? Is he just dead to you then, or
no? He's no. And again, that's like you being the extreme one saying like I want all of them to be terrible.
Yeah,
like,
I do.
Maybe he's dead to you. I mean,
for now he's dead to me.
It would be cool if Wisconsin did well, but I mean, it's kind of a weird position because I mean, Wisconsin hasn't really been a realistic threat to Ohio State for 10 years at this point.
At least, yeah.
So not that they were competitive in the games, kind of leading up to that point, but I mean, it's just ever since that Big Ten championship where they just uncorked that 59. I mean, I was there for that game. And I remember seeing the enthusiasm those fans had for Wisconsin football going in, and just watching in the over the course of just 2 quarters.
Oh yeah,
it
was over by halfway through the second quarter. Like that was it.
The enthusiasm of those students that made that trek from Madison to Indianapolis just evaporating off of their faces, and they haven't really given Ohio State a terrifying matchup outside of Madison since then.
Yeah.
So I'm until they actually right that wrong and get over the hump, they don't realistically terrify me. And it'd be cool to see Fickle do well there, but it's not like Fickle had a great run as head coach the one year he was at Ohio State. And he already and here's the other thing I'll say relative to Fickle. I don't think that there's anything that he can do at Wisconsin short of winning a national championship that will be more impressive than him getting Cincinnati into the college football playoff.
Oh God. I mean, that alone is like, that's something that you would put on any college football coach's resume for.
That is his legacy as a college football head coach, regardless of what he does at Wisconsin, short of winning a title there.
Yeah.
So he's already established as a good coach.
Right.
I don't need to root for him to succeed any further than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't want any of the Big Ten. I want them to all fail and feel awful, and that's pretty much how we do.
Yeah, because you're a cantankerous.
That's right.
Old man.
That's right.
I'm kidding.
As our getting there. As our friend Andy likes to say.
If you're old, I'm getting there. That's what really.
That's also me. Scary. But yeah, as our friend Andy like to say, I'm an SOB. I'm a Southern Ohio boy. So. Last one here. This is from Jen, who wants to know, happy game week, Johnny and George. What is on your game day menu? Do you make something fancy? Do you go somewhere where others feed you? So go to a bar or something like that? Or do you just couch it with a bag of chips and a booze of choice? I couch it. I don't like being around other people when I'm trying to concentrate on the game. At least other people. Let me put it this way. Let me take that back. If I'm with a group of people who are also invested in the game and paying it, totally fine with that. That's great. But if I have to go into another place where people are going to be not paying attention to the game or trying to draw my attention away from the game to other pursuits, I don't have any interest in that whatsoever. So like, I prefer just to chill at home and, you know, like I said, get a bag of chips. I am a huge fiend for tortilla chips. I just go through like an entire bag by myself, get some nice salsa, you know, like nothing fancy pants. And then maybe a beer or two, and that's it. And I'm not a big drinker. I do not drink more than like, I don't know, maybe a beer once every couple weeks max. But when I'm like, you know, when it's football season, yeah, I'll enjoy a tasty beverage. I find my beverage choices change with the season. So, you know, I like it when it's colder because I can bust out the stouts and the, you know, the darker ales and things like that. So that's kind of how I roll, but simple. I like to keep it simple and focused and pay attention to the game.
Yeah. For me, it, you know, just varies on the weekend. I mean, I don't really have a go-to like meal or whatever. And, you know, sometimes I'll be watching by myself. I mean, you got to remember too, sometimes we're working these things remotely.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
We don't necessarily have the opportunity to, you know, go out and procure food for ourselves. And
yeah, I'm weekend editor this weekend. I'm going to be typing the entire game.
Yeah,
that's
Johnny's working the Akron game. Right. We have to, and I'm working the Oregon game. And in those circumstances where we have to, you know, do the post-game press conferences, we have to keep our wits about ourselves in order to accurately relay the thoughts of the opposing head coach.
I will say, we were talking about 2014. So I didn't think Ohio State would win that Sugar Bowl. I had and we had a bottle of pink Moscato.
Oh, wow.
That we were saving for New Year's. And when we won that game, I just drank the entire bottle after the game. Which again is just this sugary, you know, it's like a big bottle of this sugary, like.
And then you wrote up Nick Saban's post game.
I wrote like 5 articles while I'm chugging this bottle.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I got super trashed, and I was just, you know, like writing the worst articles anyone's ever read.
I mean, I can't blame you.
It was pretty funny, and I did not repeat that because the convenient thing about that game is that. I was, you know, still a high school teacher at the time. The convenient thing about that game is that we were in winter break. But for the national championship, I had school the next day, and I really should have just called off. I don't know why I didn't do that. Instead, I didn't have anything to drink. I didn't do that. I just wrote through the night, and I didn't sleep the entire night. And I was just buzzed when I went into school the next day.
And you taught your kids what a hangover is.
I honestly said, like, guys, I didn't sleep last night. Like I told them straight up, I was like, I've been writing all night. I didn't sleep. I was like, we're going to try to be a little chill today. We're going to try to relax. And they're like, you hungover? Like, no, I didn't drink anything. I just haven't slept in 48 hours. Just give me a break. So sometimes it does backfire a little bit, but generally I try to keep it low key. And relax. So
anyway, food usually varies. I'll usually have at least a couple beers during the game.
Okay.
You know, just because it's, you know,
what do you have a particular beer of choice, George?
Well, it's usually the beer I'm actually celebrating the NOA release with right now, which is something cold.
There you go.
South Carolina.
Okay.
You've probably seen the white hat that I've occasionally worn on this show is the logo for this beer. It's definitely my favorite beer.
New Dubcast sponsor.
I would. Hey, that would be really cool. Yeah, but you know, remains to be seen. Yeah, I don't. South Carolina beer sponsoring an Ohio
That's right.
Sports podcast.
No, it's like it makes sense.
It's quite a crossover. Anyway,
it makes sense. It's fine.
I will say the one food that I do enjoy making, but I usually save it for the November months. Usually Thanksgiving, but there's, you know, because Thanksgiving is always only a couple days preceding the Ohio State-Michigan game, there's always leftover amounts from what I make. Many years ago, I went to a Chicago Bulls game, and I had the greatest. We had box seats, and the catering for that game, I had the greatest mac and cheese that I've ever had in my life. It was so good that I had to find out like who made it.
Yeah.
And I figured out that the Bulls and just the United Center in general, so the Blackhawks and the Bulls, use the same catering company for their food procurement that the Kentucky Derby does and the Churchill Downs does for their events.
There you go.
And so
Primo.
on their website, I found the recipe for their triple mac and cheese that I had in the box.
Well, now we got to include that.
And a week after I got the recipe, they took the page off the website.
They knew you were coming.
So I knew this was a forbidden secret that could not. This was too valuable of information to see the light of day. And I have since committed that recipe to memory. I'm not a big fan of cheddar cheese, so I swipe out the white cheddar, which gives it usually its distinct color for Colby Jack, which is my favorite cheese.
I think that's a good swap. The
recipe also calls for a lot of paprika, and I don't think it really makes that big of a difference. Some people do, but I usually stay away from it. I think I did use it the last time that I made it. So I have a couple alterations I make, but I have since about 2017, 2018, I have made that pretty consistently in November for Thanksgiving for my family, and then had leftovers available for the Ohio State Michigan game just about every year. So that's if I had to pick one go-to food that I have for these events, it would be the mac and cheese that they serve at the Kentucky Derby. And that is like that is my secret, like, back of my pocket recipe that I know I've never gotten bad feedback on it. Like, I know it just slaps every single time. So even just talking about it now makes me consider if I really want to make it for the opener this.
You might as well. We got to have that recipe at some point. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, like I said, it's forbidden knowledge. They literally delete it. You can still get it from the Wayback Machine, but they took it off of the website a week after I accessed it, and I was hilarious. Like, they do not want the public to know this exists.
All right, so that's Ask Us Anything this week. Thank you for sending those questions in. We'll keep answering them. It is game week. We haven't really talked about it that much, and before we get out of here, there are a few things I want to ask you, George. Just to go over the game. Of course, we're going to digest it, when we come back next week. So, I mean, I don't know who was really hankering for a really big breakdown of the Akron Zips.
Well, we said we were going to talk about it for an hour last week, so I'm sure there's many listeners that are super disappointed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. But I do want to ask you a couple of things. So first of all, what is one thing you want to see in this game against the Akron Zips? What is the number one?
That's what I made this week's question in the forum.
Oh, okay. Well, then what would be your answer, sir?
I have a good answer. All right. I just want to see Will Howard throwing the ball.
Okay.
I'm not as excited for him running just because his profile has already been pretty established in that department.
Mm-hmm.
It will be nice to see an Ohio State quarterback running the ball again consistently and having that threat available for the first time since – perhaps even Justin Fields before CJ Stroud even took the helm, in terms of having that as a consistently visible present threat. We certainly didn't have it with Kyle McCord last year. CJ Stroud got a little bit better about it in the second year of his tenure at QB, but obviously that was one of the big knocks on him in his first year, despite the fact that the first touchdown he ever scored in an Ohio State uniform was a 47-yard rushing TD against Michigan State in mop-up duty. But I am very, very curious to see, just based on what the early feedback about Howard's arm was, how comfortable do they feel with this guy who has been named the starter stretching the defense? What is this guy's arm going to look like throwing beyond 15 yards?
Right.
I'm going to be curious to see how willing they are to attack multiple levels of the field, or if Ohio State is just going to be doing a bunch of check down cheese all season and not really throwing any further than the sticks.
Right.
I don't think we necessarily get an outright answer to that, just given the fact that Ohio State is a 50.5 point favorite.
We'll get to that in a second.
But you would think under those circumstances that they would be willing to experiment a little bit more with putting the ball downfield and seeing how comfortable their new quarterback is distributing to various areas of the field. So I'm looking forward to seeing Howard as a passer. That is predominantly what I will have my eye on watching this game.
So that's high on my list as well. I would say to just say something a little bit different. I want to see how the running game performs. The big bugbear about this team for the past several years. I mean, even with the Notre Dame game, I don't count plays where there's only 10 defenders on the field as proving your toughness or whatever. I want to see them turn into road graders a little bit. You have two premier running backs. You have some of the best, running back talent in America that you are blocking for. I want to see a lot of yards on the ground. I do want to see Will Howard air it out. I want to see them test his arm a little bit, really just like see what he can do in the intermediate and long routes. But more than anything, I just want to know that if that's not there, they're going to be able to utilize the two really great running backs that they have to their utmost capabilities.
Well, two running backs and supposedly one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah, right. And yes, exactly.
Capable of 80-yard rushing touchdowns in practice.
Right. But yeah, I absolutely want to see how that's going to be integrated and how Chip Kelly is going to be really taking advantage of those talents.
Yeah, I think relative to the running game, just the Chip Kelly scheme overall at Ohio State is what's going to be most interesting.
Exactly. And I think that's going to tell you a lot about how the season's going to go and what that looks like and how they're able to successfully integrate Judkins and Henderson into that scheme. So those are some things that I'm really, really looking forward to. I'm going to do it over under real quick. Let's stick with rushing yards. What do you think? Where would you put the over-under on rushing yards for this game?
For this game specifically?
Yes.
I mean, look, if they cover this spread, which just,
well, again, we'll get to the spread in a second.
Well, quick aside.
Okay.
I mean, betting anything north of a 30-point spread is crazy in its own right. You should not be, putting your money down like that. 40 points is unacceptable. 50 points is just outright lunacy. Yeah. So temper your expectations relative to seeing a 50-point Ohio State win in the season opener. Right. That being said, if the game is going that route and we know that they don't really want to put a ton of actual their good stuff on film, you're going to see a lot of pounding the rock rather than a lot of airing it out after they go up 4 scores or something.
Yep.
And it becomes apparent that Akron is just not going to be able to break through on this what is supposed to be one of, if not the most complete defense in the country, perhaps in Ohio State history, according to some people. So I would say I'm reminded of, one of the greatest games I ever attended as a fan was the week after they lost to Michigan State. That was the last game I ever saw in college at home. And it was the only time I ever saw them lose at home because I skipped the Virginia Tech game that they lost the season prior. And I very graciously got to go to the Michigan game the following week where Zeke absolutely tore them up and JT Barrett congruently tore them up. And they had something like over 350 rushing yards against Michigan on the ground that game in what was a romp. I would expect them to have at least 350 rushing yards if this game really gets out of hand against Akron.
Okay.
So that's
I'll be more conservative.
Is 350.
I'll be more conservative. I think the over-under is going to be like 250. I think they'll probably, I think the score will be lower, and I think they'll try to keep it a little more balanced just for, practice sake and things like that. 250 is still a lot of yards. And I think that's probably more realistic, but I don't know. I'm curious to see how it does end up playing out,
if it's
because
a 50-point spread.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And so that's my last question.
You think they only get 250 rushing yards?
I don't think they cover. I don't think there's a chance in hell they cover. That's
Okay.
my last question, though, which is like, do they cover the spread? I think there's gonna be some growing pains with the offense a little bit. They've got time to do that, but you're integrating
Zips.
You're integrating a new center. You've got a new quarterback. You've got new running backs. You've got a lot of new pieces there. They're all great pieces. This is what you want, but I think that takes time in a live game situation. Now, again, the Zips are 50-point underdogs. This is not Murderer's Row they're going against. They probably face much stiffer competition, with the defense going 70% in practice. But I still think that scheme-wise, getting everybody on the same page, figuring out timing, that's stuff that you can't really replicate until you're in a live game situation. I just don't see Ohio State coming out and scoring 60 points against Akron. I think that's a blowout. I don't think they give up more than 7 points or 10 points max, and that includes like a garbage time touchdown or something like that. But and they probably still win by 35, or 40 even. But 50 is just, to me, that's a hill to climb, and I just don't see them covering that spread. I think that's ludicrous.
I just don't expect Akron to have a lot of offensive success.
No, I don't think
it remains to be seen how many points Ohio State scores.
Right. And that's really it. They can call their score. They can pick their score. It's just what they decide to leave it at.
Right. So I think that it's realistic is a strong word, but I don't think it's as far-fetched as it sounds just saying it out loud. If only because if this defense is really as good as people say it is, Akron is not going to visit the end zone once on Saturday. So I don't think a scenario in which Ohio State wins by a final score of like 56-3 is totally out of the question. And that's even assuming Akron wants to, avoid a 0 on the scoreboard, as opposed to, like being already down 42-0 and being in field goal range for one drive.
Oh, sure. Saying, instead of just saying,
well, if we're actually going to try to compete, maybe we should go for the end zone on 4th down.
Yeah, right, of course.
Or at least try to keep the drive alive, as opposed to just, taking 3-point inconsequential points.
My stat sheet says we go for the points here. We gotta kick that.
So and then the flip side of that is, what if there's just some goofy turnover that happens because the offense hasn't been in a live game situation yet, and there's some kind of miscommunication that takes place, and that puts Akron in the red zone immediately, and then they can just get free points regardless. So it's you can't, like, you have to think about these things if you're actually going to be putting money down relative to whether or not this is a good investment. It's why I'm saying, betting anything north of a 30-point spread is just insane, because the margin of error for an over taking place is so slim in what is such a crazy, often chaotic sport. And we have no data on these teams yet. This is the season opener. Well, everything up to this point has just been conjecture in terms of how they're going to perform and how they're going to try to execute.
Exactly.
So I will say, I'll be the contrarian. I'll say that they cover. I'll say that they get it done. I think that 56-3 is probably going to end up being my scoring prediction, because that assumes that Ryan Day, who is frequently aggressive on 4th down, doesn't want to settle for field goals, and is more interested in, executing as often as possible against a team that does not measure up to Ohio State, and is only interested in getting in the end zone all afternoon, which I think is going to be the case.
Yeah.
And the 3 points for Akron accounts for a scenario in which they do get a turnover in,
or maybe
Ohio
it's early
State's
in the game,
and
they get on the 40-yard line or 30-yard line, and
right,
they get a long field goal.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about a long field goal. Remember, this is a MAC team we're talking about here. So, but,
I think honestly, I
don't know if there's any Groza or Groza finalists potentially on that team.
That's
so,
right. If I'm putting a score on this, I think it's probably going to be something more like 45-7. Like maybe there's just something that happened. Like maybe they get a garbage time touchdown or something like that. Still a blowout. I mean, we're really just splitting hairs at that point. But I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We will definitely be back next week. I mean, we'll fresh after watching my 15th rewatch of the Connor Stalions documentary on Netflix, and of course, breaking down everything related to the Ohio State Akron game. So we'll talk about all that stuff next time. I'm excited. It's game week. We made it. We're
back, folks.
We're back. So until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.